Good evening and welcome to the April 27th meeting of the Civil Service Commission. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Manukian.
Here.
Commissioner Abkarian.
Here.
Chair Devine.
Here.
Commissioner Yakubian and Commissioner Gazarian are not present at the moment but are expected to join us shortly.
Okay, thank you. Next item.
Minutes for the meeting of April 13th, 2016.
Okay.
Move to approve. And
I think we may
Yeah.
need to put this item over because Commissioner Abkarian was not present.
Okay.
Okay, we'll skip that and go on to the next item.
Oral communications.
I have no cards. Anybody in the audience wishing to address the commission on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, please.
Recruitment and examination reports.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is our recruitment and examination status report. It reflects the recruitment activity amongst the various members of my staff, filing periods, the dates of exams, and whether these exams are open and promotional. And they're all listed by department. As you can see, it continues to be a busy time for our staff. We're actually up to 61 processes at various stages. It's up a bit. We've been hovering around 50 for the last couple of meetings, but anyway, we are working on all of these, and if Commission has any questions on any of these processes, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, this is a note and file item.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on, please.
Commissioner Yakubian has joined us. Item 5, eligible list established.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this report is the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting from 2 weeks ago. As you can see from the report, we have established 3 lists since our last meeting, 2 of them promotional, 1 of them open. And as you typically see with the open recruitment, there's a much larger candidate pool. But anyway, this report shows the applications received, and then ultimately in that far right column, the total number of candidates who make it onto our eligible list, which is a much smaller number than the number of applications. But once again, if you have any questions about any of these recruitments, I'd be happy to try and answer those for you. Otherwise, this too is a note and file item.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on, please.
Request to cancel eligible list, police communications operator.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is the request to cancel the open eligibility list for the police communications operator position. We bring these items to you periodically when we believe that a list eligible list has been appropriately exhausted. This list was established back in November of 2014, so it is a year and a half old. And as I've said before, sometimes these lists get stale, and we get to a point where even amongst those who applied and made it through the process, for whatever reason, the interest is no longer there amongst those individuals. As you can see from the number of individuals who are withdrawing or waiving from consideration at this point. As I said, this list was first established back in November of 2014. We hired 3 individuals off that list. Unfortunately, two resigned while on probation, and fairly common for this particular type of position. The dispatchers, whether it's in police or fire, it's a very challenging position. It's a 1-year probationary period, and oftentimes if the candidate is not doing well, they'll either be failed on probation, or in many cases they'll just choose to resign. But we had 3 hires, 2 resigned. We had, once again, a very high number of people fail the background investigation. 8. Then we got to the point where a number are either waiving or withdrawing. We had 2 withdraw completely, 9 waive. We've had 2 in the current requisition, 2 interview but not selected, and we currently have 1 individual in the background process. But again, we've gone through 25 eligible names on this list, and we're hoping to start over and begin with a new process. Obviously, we were not terribly happy with the outcome of this. To put together a process like this is very, very labor intensive, and we're looking at a different type of examination process where we're actually purchasing something. It's a product called Ergometric, and we're going to see if that yields better candidates. But at this point, we do want to start over and utilize that process. And also, I think the Commission is aware that we recently canceled a similar list with our Fire Communication Department, and we are going to conduct a joint, at least testing process for police and fire, and I guess capitalize on some economies of scale and do it that way. So. If this is approved, we'd like to commence with a recruitment process, do both police and fire at the same time, and hopefully have a better outcome.
Move to approve.
My question is related to the 9 waived until further notice. So does that mean that 9 people were offered this position and they decided to waive their...
Chairman Devine, Commissioner Manukian, it doesn't necessarily mean they were offered the position, but they were contacted and said, and said, you're now eligible to be considered. We'd like to bring you in and interview you, and typically that's an interview with the chief and police management. And these 9 individuals said, I'm not interested at this time, but I'd like to stay on the list. That's the difference between a withdrawal is somebody who says, hey, I've got another job, or I'm no longer interested. But the waivers kind of want to stay on the list, but they're not interested for the time being. So it's it's not of any benefit to us either way. But
Okay. Got it.
Okay, I have a question. Are you okay with it?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
I have a quick question, just housekeeping. If I read the numbers correctly, you started out with 34 and we're down to 25 that you went through. Does that mean there's actually 9 left on the list now that would be actually canceled off?
Chair Devine, yes, that's correct. There would be 9 remaining lists.
Okay, and if I read this correctly, the list is for 2 years, so it will expire on its own in November of this year, is that correct?
Yes, failure to act, and otherwise the list would just die at November of 2016. So.
Okay, and the last question, of the 9 remaining, are these the same 9 that waived until further notice, or I guess what I'm asking is, have the remaining people been notified of this possible action and given an opportunity to weigh in on it?
Chair Devine, the Commission adopted a policy a few years back when we are faced with a situation like this, that we're to notify the top 3 available candidates on the list that we're intending to cancel the list and that it would be coming before the Civil Service Commission. So that process was done, and the candidates were notified, and I don't see anyone here objecting.
Do we have a second?
Yes. Second.
Unanimous consent?
Yes.
Unanimous consent. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, Community Services Series.
Minister Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is a revision of an existing class series on the Community Services Series within our Community Services and Parks Department. And these are individuals who are engaged in all kinds of social, recreational activity in our various parks and facilities. Really, the main purpose of this item is to include a newly approved classification title within this series of the Senior Community Services Supervisor level. I know this specification series looks very long. There are various levels, but really this does represent the entire series from really the entry level all the way up to the manager level. In fact, this community service manager is a classification that we're not currently utilizing. So anyway, that's really the main purpose of this. Otherwise, it's also just appropriate time to update this specification. It was last updated in the year 2000. It doesn't sound that long ago, but it was actually 16 years ago. So every once in a while, these need to be updated, and it's time. So the Commission has questions. I'd be happy to try and answer them for you. We also have representatives from Community Services and Parks Department, as well as Ms. Abramian from my staff is here, in case you have questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doyle. Any questions? Do I hear a motion?
Second.
Unanimous consent. Next item.
Class specification for approval, Deputy Director of Public Works.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a class specification for approval of the Deputy Director of Public Works. Mr. Golanian, the Public Works Director, is putting together the organization for his upper management team and the direct reports. Right now, the organization is a bit of a mismatch of both deputies and administrators that report to Mr. Golanian, and he's been in his job about almost 2 years now, and he's had a chance to kind of get the lay of the land and has settled upon a organization that has really 4 deputies reporting to them, one of whom is a deputy director / city engineer, which is not really part of this, and it's a separate class specification. That position requires a registered civil engineer, and the pay is a little higher, and it has a little higher level of responsibility. But the 3 remaining deputies, we would have one over what's called environmental services, one over field services, and one over facilities management. And probably the best way to sort of get the lay of the land is to look at the organization charts that have been provided, which looks at all of the various functions. And these are primarily our field operations under each of the deputy positions. And these 3 deputy positions, exclusive of that city engineer one, would all be at the same level, and as far as pay and status and everything like that. And ultimately, when this process is complete, we'll go ahead and fill these positions. And again, if you have questions on these, we're happy to try and answer them. Mr. Golanian is here, as is Mr. Nersessian, who worked on this. If you have questions, but this is an item that does require Commission approval. So,
Move to approve.
Second.
Hold on. I don't have a card, but does anyone wish to address the Commission on this item? And if so, could you please fill out a card when you finish?
I
so we
will.
have it on the record?
I will.
Thank
Thank you. And
Do you have a time in mind?
Pardon me?
Do you have a certain time in mind?
How many minutes?
It's 5 minutes?
be very brief.
5 minutes?
Thank you. Less than that, I would hope.
Okay, thank you.
No issues with the class specification.
Identify
It's-
yourself for the record.
Thank you. I'm Mike Wiedeker. I am a City of Glendale employee. Today is the anniversary of my hiring in human resources, where Mr. Doyle and I worked together. So completing 29 years, tomorrow I start the first day of my 30th year.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Glendale has been very good to me. I'm very pleased to be here. The only concern that I would have is very self-serving, and so I simply offer it to you for consideration, and that is, as a long-serving employee in the management ranks, the minimal qualifications of 7 years could be precluding if there isn't adequate grace granted for my additional years of management services in other operations. I was moved to integrated waste 3.5 years ago. However, I had 14 years in building and safety, 5 years in public works administration, and through no fault of anyone, things can happen. Mr. Doyle could leave, someone else could leave, and someone who has no idea who Mike Wiedeker is could be reviewing applications. So that was really my only concern, that the hard and fast 7 years in integrated waste would not preclude me from being permitted to compete.
So what is it? I'm sorry, I didn't. What were you recommending?
Actually, I'm not recommending. I'm simply indicating the only concern I have is over the 7 years requirement of experience in integrated waste or in refuse collection. Our predecessor had a requirement of 6 years of general public works experience, but none was particular to refuse collection or landfill. So this would be a new requirement for the specific kind of experience versus the more general public works experience. So this could be a false concern on my part. The organization's been very good to me, but if I don't come and express that concern to you today, and a month from now we recruit and I'm deemed not eligible to compete, you would look at me and say, well, why didn't you come before us when we considered the class specification? And rightly so. So that's really the only reason I'm coming before you.
Okay, Mr.
After.
Yes,
no,
sir.
I don't have a question for you.
Okay.
I just want to make it.
Harvey?
I would too like to be heard.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I have a question also. So I think, first of all, I'd like to get an answer to the question that Mr. Whitaker stated, because it might be a moot point after that. If I understand it correctly, the way it reads here, 7 years responsible and recent solid waste and recycling experience. And I believe he's asking, can that be substituted for
Public Works.
other duties in the department where he's at a management level? So, Mr. Golanian, perhaps you could answer that for us. Did you understand
Good evening.
the question? Did I
Yes.
state it correctly?
Yes.
What's he doing?
Good evening, Chair, divine members
Don't
of
let
the
him get
Commission.
out.
Oh, the flag.
No, jump. I like that one.
Careful.
Good evening, Chair, divine members of the Commission, ROUBIK, GOLANIAN, Director of Public Works. The straight answer to your question is yes. We have a standard note in our job specs that says an equivalent combination of experience, education, and/or training may substitute for the listed minimum requirements. So if a candidate has a certain experience, education, and training that may not exactly to the word meet the minimum qualification, there is a provision for substitution.
I see that now. And so, where's Mr. Whitaker? Oh, does that answer your question?
I believe as well as it can be answered.
Okay. Mr. Golanian, thank you.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add a personal note. You mentioned this is Mr. Golanian's second year, and I just want to indicate that I believe he's doing an outstanding job from what I'm hearing. And we want to thank you for the great work you're doing, Mr. Golanian. So, okay, with that...
Move to approve?
wait,
hold on, there's a question.
had a comment.
Sorry.
Yeah, I do actually. I don't know if that actually answers the concern that was raised, because may can basically is very discretionary. If public works experience is acceptable, I guess that would be my question: is an equivalent public works experience acceptable, or does it have to be in the solid waste and recycling sort of space?
Chair Divine, Commissioner Yakubian, the preference would be the experience related directly to solid waste and refuse collection. But if a candidate, a person has, let's say, 4 or 5 years of experience within the solid waste arena and the rest in general public works experience, that will be a good combination, a positive, acceptable combination to replace the 7 years. But by the same token, if someone has 1 year of solid waste experience, then I'd be hesitant to make that
How about if someone has 3 years of waste management experience? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, it depends.
Let's
absolutely.
address the elephant in the room. I mean, why are we, dancing around it? Could Mr. Whitaker apply for this job? Yes or no?
The answer is yes.
Okay,
Based on my knowledge of his years of experience in our management ranks, and more specifically and more recently in solid waste within refuse collection within the department, yes.
Okay, and that doesn't mean you're going to hire him. It just means that he can apply. You hire the most qualified person.
Exactly. He will meet the minimum qualifications.
And that gives the flexibility, at least for you, to make that decision in looking at the overall picture.
Absolutely.
And that would apply not only to Mr. Whitaker, but in general to people in the same situation.
Any candidate who applies for the position, yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Are okay with that?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Do we have unanimous consent on that?
I abstain. I came in the middle of it.
We have 4 yeses and 1 abstention.
Why don't we take a vote on it then? if
Okay,
there's an
let's do
abstention?
roll call.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian,
Abstain.
Commissioner Manukian,
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian,
Yes.
Chair Devine.
Yes. Okay, next item, and let the record show Mr. Gazarian is present now.
Job bulletin for approval, Police Lieutenant.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this item is the job bulletin for approval for the promotional position of Police Lieutenant, the Glendale Police Department. Because this is a safety promotional examination, as per our civil service rules, this item does require commission approval. This bulletin is fully consistent with the approved class specification for police lieutenant, with 2 exceptions, and both of those exceptions have to do with one is an experience requirement, the other is the educational requirement. What is being proposed here is that the experience requirement, which typically requires 2 years as a police sergeant, and the specification says with 1 year as a patrol sergeant or a patrol supervisor. What we wanted to do is just simply say 2 years as a police sergeant and experience as a patrol sergeant, not limiting it to 1 full year on the patrol sergeant as a patrol sergeant. The reason for that is it's a department that's in the last few years been very lean as far as the staffing, and they've had to move people around quite a bit in order to fill specific needs within the department. And there may be some very prepared, very well qualified sergeants that may fall short of that 1 year in patrol. That's one. The second would be the bachelor's degree requirement. Typically, that is required upon application, and what's being proposed is that the bachelor degree requirement be met upon appointment to the position, which would enable someone who's very close to getting the college degree to go ahead, apply, and compete, and they wouldn't be appointed until they ultimately get the degree, but at least it would not keep them from applying. This is an attempt to really broaden the pool of candidates. I can recall, in some recent police lieutenant recruitments of having as few as 2 and 4 candidates, which is not a good place to be for an organization our size. There was one point a few years back where some consideration was given, and actually we did open it up as an open recruitment, which we really don't want to do that. I have no idea how many people are going to apply, but it's my hope that we do see 8, 9, 10 candidates put in for this job, because it's really, really important, and we anticipate a variety of openings over the next, over the 2-year life of this list once we complete it. So with that, this is here for your consideration. We do have Deputy Chief Povolitis is here, Lieutenant Carver from the Police Department, as well as Sean Chavez from my staff who put this together. So, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any questions? Yes. Mr. Kubian?
Yeah, I was wondering, how long does the process take? The application process?
Chair Devine, Commissioner Kubian, the opening, assuming this is approved by the Commission, the opening date would be May 2nd. The closing would be May 13th. So it's a 2-week time frame for the applications. And then following that, we would, I would say within probably 3 to 4 weeks, we would actually have the process, which will consist of a tactical exercise and 2 different interview panels. So I would think in a matter of a month following the closing of the filing period that we would have a list ready, and then that list would take effect and be in effect for 2 years. So figuring, probably by late June, we would have a list, and that list would go from June 2016 all the way to June 2018.
The reason for my question is that I'm trying to understand the second prong, where a bachelor's is not mandatory at the time of the application, but at the time of the appointment. I mean, can you explain to me how that would work actually? So if someone is in school now, they can apply, and then if they're not finishing until, let's say, next summer, they wait to be appointed?
Correct.
Pending the receipt?
We would pass over them on the list or go on to the next name if they don't meet that requirement.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Just a couple of questions that I had. I want to get clarification. How many openings do we have, or would you anticipate for this position up until the end of the year?
I would refer to either Deputy Chief Povolitis or Lieutenant Carver.
Carl Povolitis, Deputy Police Chief. We anticipate in the fiscal year that we would have 3 immediate openings, and I would anticipate over the life of this list, it's a little bit of a guess, that we could go to 5 or 6. That is basically 50 to 60% of our entry-level management staff. So this has the potential at least to be a very deep list, and hence the need for a broad and qualified pool.
And it's going to be live for 2 years now. The number of sergeants that we have that could potentially, am I right, within the range of we have about 40 sergeants?
About 36.
36, okay. And what happens, let's say, if someone decides at this moment they don't want to apply for this position and they're qualified, and at a later point, let's say a year down the line, is there a specific reason why we do these lists for like 2 years, or is it just cost related?
Chair Devine, Commissioner Manukian, there's a very specific reason. It's for 2 years. It's in the charter. Okay. The charter currently requires promotional lists to go for 2 years unless they get exhausted. If we end up with 3 people on the list, we hire all 3, then we get to start over again. But yeah, the lists have a 2-year duration. But nothing stops us from open lists. We can cancel those after a year.
But because my concern is, let's say that we exhaust the list, and a year down from now, we need additional. So we can't. Nothing stops us from doing another. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If we've exhausted all the potential names, we can start over again.
And the other question that I had related to the education, I know the degree that is preferred as far as to be related to the law enforcement. Am I correct? I saw something to that effect.
I mean, preference would be something related to law enforcement, administration, justice, public administration. But that although somewhat preferred, is not essential. We have people with degrees in lots of different things, and all have value within a large organization. Okay, so it doesn't preclude them just because they have degree. Okay, and let me see, what was the other one? And the degree requirement, as Mr. Doyle indicated, basically at the time when they fill out the application or apply for this position, they have not completed all their courses, but at the time when they're going to get appointed, as long as they have the degree by that time. They would be required to have the degree before they could be appointed to the position. What we're really finding is we have people who are, I'm going to call them lifelong learners, and so now you have degrees to confer at different times of the year. You can't go with June, December, because it's non-traditional education, and so you might have someone who gets a degree middle of June, somewhere in August when they finish up their last class. That's all the question. I'm completely okay with it.
Right. Mr. Appt.
You talk about how many panels do we have? The important position.
Yes.
So
we have retirements and we have promotions.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Chair Devine,
we turned it off.
Commissioner Karian, the selection the selection process is on the third page of this, and it will consist of initially an evaluation of the applications to make sure qualifications are met, and there's a tactical exercise which is going to be worth 20%. Very important. Somebody will be put in a simulated situation of some type of a law enforcement predicament, and they'll have to sort of be the commander at that particular incident. And then the remaining 80% would be 2 interview panels, 40% each. The first one would be a professional panel consisting of probably police captains from outside other agencies, and then the second panel will be a community panel / internal panel. It's typically how we have done the community panels, at least this level. We mix them in with some, we have a mixture of some prominent individuals in the community as well as managers within the organization all into one panel. So it's 40, 40, and 20% is the process that we'll seek to do here. And this is, I think, identical to the one we did.
It is the same process we have used before.
Okay, move to approve.
I have a question.
I'm sorry.
You say that, Mr. Doyle, that the Glendale Police Officer Association was sent a bulletin as to this, these 2 proposed changes, inviting them to express any concerns. I take it they expressed no concerns?
Sir, no concerns.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
May I have a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian,
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian,
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian,
Yes.
Chair Devine.
Yes. Next item, please.
Public hearing, request to suspend competition and grant appointments by Recogniz Attainment to the position of police custody officer.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Doyle to introduce the item, and then we will open the public hearing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. As you know, this item came before the Commission at its your March 23rd meeting. At that meeting, the Commission considered a request by staff to appoint 14 employees in the classification of Community Service Officer who are currently assigned to the Police Custody Bureau to a newly established classification title of Police Custody Officer through a process known as Recognized Attainment. This process is set forth in both the Charter and the Civil Service Rules. Staff is of the belief that Recognized Attainment is the most appropriate means of having these employees appointed to the new positions. Last month, we spent a great deal of time talking about the experience, training, the certifications, the background process, the medical exam, the psychological evaluation, all of the various things that each of these employees have all gone through in order to be eligible for their current positions as CSO jailers, but would also be the same requirement as in the newly established title of Police Custody Officer. At the March 23rd meeting, there was concern that this effort may be circumventing the normal hiring process or perhaps closing the door on a number of candidates who might be interested in applying. I would again remind the Commission that this is a process that is fully authorized in both the Charter and the Civil Service Rules. So I don't see it as a circumvention, but more importantly, in an effort to sort of allay the concerns regarding closing the door to candidates, we did work with the GCEA, Glendale City Employees Association. They represent the employees in these classifications to do a level of outreach to each of our community service officers throughout the organization in order to gauge whether or not there was any interest by people not working in the jail in actually applying for this position. Exhibit B in your packet is the email that Miss Stockton, Gail Stockton, who is the GCA president, sent out to, again, all of the CSOs in the organization And in her email, she essentially indicated that we're attempting to move these employees in the jail into the police police custody officer position. Ms. Stockton asked for feedback. She gave them 5 days to respond to her, and essentially there were no concerns, not only no concerns, but really no interest in any of those folks in going to work in custody. I think she got one response from someone asking how much the job pays, and she responded to that, and I don't think that person got back with her. So with this effort, I hopefully we have again addressed the concerns of the Commission about whether or not this is an appropriate means to move ahead. As I said, these 14 employees are doing the job. They're doing it very well. They're heavily trained, highly trained individuals, and really what this amounts to is a title change, but because it's a new title and it's a different salary, we have a process of either doing a recruitment or utilizing the Recogniz Attainment methodology. So therefore, it's certainly the recommendation of staff to take Recogniz Attainment route. I do want to be clear that we've established this new title. We have a specification in place, and certainly future appointments to this position will be handled through the traditional route, the traditional hiring process. In fact, we probably have a need to do that very soon and do a open recruitment for police custody officer and fill the positions in that fashion. And again, the position title will be custody officer. It will no longer be CSO/jailer like we've done in the past. Hopefully we'll be successful in that process. But as far as the item before you, as you know, this does require an affirmative vote of all 5 members, and I'll leave it up to the Commission to consider that. So,
thank you. What I'd like to do is ask if any of my colleagues have questions of Mr. Doyle's presentation. If so, we can do it. I have 2 speaker cards for public comment, a public hearing. So if you want to hold your questions until after we hear from the public, I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, I just, for clarification,
okay,
and then I'll hold my questions. On the March 23rd materials, which appear to be reproduced for today's hearing.
That's correct.
The date has not changed. The date of the, if approved, the date of appointment would the recognized attainment will take effect April 16. That was last time. What is it now, if approved? When will it take effect? Immediately?
It would take effect. We would work with our payroll department, and our recommendation will be retroactive to April 16th. That's the beginning of a pay period. So
that's appropriate to do retroactive?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'll hold my questions.
I have an item of clarification as well from Mr. Dole.
Please.
Mr. Dole, just a quick question. The qualifications, my understanding was a promotional qualifications that anyone in the city of Glendale could apply for, correct?
Commissioner Carey.
They met the requirements.
Correct. That's correct.
But the only people that we asked were just the CSOs. We didn't ask any of the other employees that meet qualifications if they'd like to apply for this job.
Oh, that's correct. The recommendation, Chair Devine contacted me, and that was his specific recommendation, that we look at that CSO pool of individuals. But no, this was not done on a broad citywide effort. That's
to like advertise and say anyone who qualifies, anyone else wants to apply for this or anything like that.
Well, as far as this specific email,
this specific email was just to the CSOs.
Correct. That's correct.
Not to everyone who qualifies.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, we'll open the public hearing, and I have a card from Gail Stockton.
Good evening, Commission members. I'm Gail Stockton, President of the Glendale City Employees Association. My role is to represent all of our GCA members, including the review of HR actions pertaining to our members. Thank you for considering this matter. Although the use of recognized attainment is rare and I appreciate your concerns, I strongly feel that the use of recognized attainment is appropriate in this instance due to the specialized training and experience of the current jail employees, and considering the purpose of the salary study, which was to look at both the job title and the compensation of those doing the job. It was determined that it was appropriate for both to be changed for this group of employees. It was never the intention to require the current employees to reapply and test for their positions. These are very dedicated, experienced employees who have completed hundreds of hours of training for custody, correctional policies, and practices. I found out today that it's 368 in the academy and then 24 hours annually. As mentioned in the report, I personally verified there are no other CSOs seeking to apply for this position. I ask that the Commission vote in favor of approving these appointments to the custody officer positions via recognized attainment, and I thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, the next card I have is Louis Frosto.
Hello, members of the Commission. My name is Louis Frosto. I'm currently a senior custody officer working in the Custody Bureau. I come here before you today as one of the 14 members that would be affected by this agenda item. I first want to begin by explaining the hiring process and qualifications that these men and women have gone through to be in the positions that they are in. I understand that this is a hiring process in brief, and I know you have paperwork in front of you that kind of explains in detail what that process is like. For the sake of time, I won't go through each of those steps in too much detail. I do want to reiterate that with the exception of the physical ability test, the hiring process is the same as for a police officer. Each man and woman that are currently working have gone through this exhaustive process. After the CSO custody officer is hired, they are required to go through a high-stress formal correctional academy, either with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Riverside County Sheriff's Department, or Orange County Sheriff's Department. Upon successful graduation from the academy, these officers receive state-mandated certification under the Standards and Training for Corrections. This is the equivalent of POST, the Peace Officer Standards and Training. Every year thereafter, these custody officers are required to complete a minimum of 24 hours of annual training to keep current with their certification. In our Bureau, we currently have 14 full-time COs and 4 full-time supervisors. The average years of service being 11 years. In addition, 69% of our custody personnel have college degrees, something that the minimum requirements don't require. This is commendable considering that, like a police officer position, a high school diploma is the only thing required to apply. I briefly wanted to address the Commission's concerns that by using the recognized attainment clause, the City would be limiting the opportunity for other City employees. The reality is that a current transfer policy within the Police Department already exists via a form called the 702 form that any eligible employee in the Police Department was eligible to fill out. This hasn't been done. As far as the addressing the concern that it didn't go citywide, it would be a whole different process than for a CSO to be promoted into a jail position than it would be for an outside City employee to be put into the custody position. The reason for that is because they have not gone through the background investigation, the oral panel, the written examination required by the Standards and Training of Corrections, psychological exam, medical exam, polygraph examination. All of those steps were not done by the people working outside of the Police Department. That's why specifically the CSOs in the department were contacted. Custody positions are difficult to successfully recruit for and difficult to keep filled. This is due in part because of the nature of the job. After a police officer makes an arrest, that individual is transferred into the custody of jail staff. It is our responsibility to maintain the security of the facility, prevent escape, and provide for the well-being of those arrested. We have the authority to use force a lot like a police officer would out in the field. We are sometimes assaulted, both verbally and physically, and endure a high amount of stress. Our last recruitment process is a testament to this. We had 2 people hired from the last recruitment process. The last one that was hired quit after 1 week. without giving a proper 2-week notice. She simply walked out of the job. The Human Resources Department, with the goal of properly classifying personnel, requested the creation of the police custody officer position. The City Council approved the creation of this position to better classify this highly specialized spot. I believe it would be unfair to have current custody personnel apply for and compete for positions with job descriptions identical to those they're presently doing. In the eyes of the city, this is a promotion, but in reality, this is simply a title change, with a salary increase to go along with it. These employees should not have to reapply for positions they already hold. In addition, the city stands to spend not only time but money in conducting a promotional exam citywide when the need isn't really there. Like Director Matt Doyle said, there are currently vacancies in the Bureau, and they do plan on doing an open recruitment in the near future. So those employees outside the police department and out in the public, if they are interested in a position, we have plenty. Nobody's knocking at our door to do what we do. Thank you for your time.
Just a quick clarification.
Yeah.
Based on the comment that you made, that people within the city would have to go through the background, all that, but even if they went through all that, they still wouldn't need to get all the training that you guys have.
Correct.
Okay. That's it.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
What was your name again? I'm sorry.
My name is Louis Frost.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Give me a minute. I have to make the record. Mr. Doyle, this is with the understanding that should this recognized attainment be approved by this body, henceforth, in the future, the position is going to be made through the 6-step traditional recruitment process that you've set forth in our handout, which is the written exam, oral interview, background investigation, et cetera, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now, if that's the case, the recognized attainment appears to be appropriate in light of your having cited the historical difficulties in maintaining, as our last speaker also commented on, in maintaining CSOs for any extended period of time, except you now have a batch of CSOs who your survey has shown that they are underpaid in comparison to other cities, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. That kind of begs the question for me, because if they are underpaid and you are seeking to, through this attainment, elevate their pay by reclassifying them, yes?
Commissioner Gazarian, yeah, two things we're trying to accomplish. The appropriate classification,
right?
Because we went out, surveyed, and basically nobody does it the way we do it.
Right.
They either call them correctional officers, custody officers, whatever. So the appropriate classification title, as well as a competitive salary.
I'm a believer in the fact that, requiring training and education for people coming in from a wider pool, as may have been a cause for concern for Commissioner Apkarian, which I think on principle is an appropriate concern, but on this special circumstance, it seems to me, and I kind of wrote out stuff that the young man really seemed to repeat, because that environment is replete with stresses and issues and uniqueness that is entirely different than any other environment. Even a police officer on the field who is properly identified and armed, last I checked when I visit the jails, the CSOs are not armed walking around, and there is potential for a stressful environment to be created. To require people who have had no exposure to that to come in and test for the position. It seems to me, as you have correctly noted, that they may meet the minimum standards, perhaps even, but they will be ill-prepared compared to those who are already necessarily more qualified by virtue of them having been on the job and proven their viable participation in that setting. What begs the question is that if those people who were making $1 should be making $1.50, for example, then what about their supervisors who you correctly note that are even subject to more stringent training? Now, are those supervisors, shouldn't they be then, instead of making $2, make $2.25? So why is it that you're only isolating the CSOs, which is great? You're trying to recognize them. What about their supervisors? Are they going to get some kind of a promotion to be commensurate with the people that are apparently now more qualified that they are being, who are being supervised by their supervisors?
Or their captains. Maybe increase.
No, I'm only going to keep it in the jail level.
I got it.
I want the jail supervisors, if they're going to supervise higher qualified and higher paid, colleagues, do they not then logically get a raise as a similar recognition?
Great questions. The level that we're dealing with here are the community service officers, right. And then some of them, as you can see, 4 of them are assigned as seniors. Those are assignments; those aren't job classifications.
I see.
Also within the GCA bargaining unit is a, what I would say, an appropriately titled classification of police custody supervisor. Is that correct? Custody supervisor. I get that right. These are people that are supervising, yet they're still within the GCA. Okay. When we surveyed the CSO jailers, we also surveyed that level as well. And we addressed that. That's kind of the irony here. We were able to make those adjustments through resolution with the city council for those individuals, but those individuals didn't require a salary change. I'm sorry, they didn't require a title change.
I see. Okay.
These folks,
they required a title change.
Title change, higher pay. Therefore, that means it's a promotion under the civil service system.
Very well. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Okay. Again, I just want to clarify. We did a study, and that study indicated that the guys doing this job are not being paid enough and should be reclassified just like everybody else. Now we're at a point that we've done that. All we're doing is allowing those same people to move into these positions, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
I'm ready to approve this thing.
Any more comments?
No.
Karen?
Yeah, I have one comment. My concern again was to ensure that all the employees are notified. One of the jobs that we have in here is to ensure that the employees are treated fairly. Both when we go to the hearing, or a hearing on side of the employees, because management has enough attorneys to try to protect them, so to speak. So our job is to try to balance the tilt, so to speak. And the second is to ensure that that transparency is done. So that's one thing that I wanted, and Chair Devine did a great job in ensuring that all the other CSOs were notified. I wasn't really sure when I came in here what I was going to do, but I have to say that Mr. Frosto did an incredible job. I think the way he spoke, what he said, answering most of the questions that I had in his statement was really an exceptional job. So for that, I'm ready to move forward with this.
And I'd just like to close the comments by saying that thank you to the GCA and to Matt and your staff for taking care of this final thing that I needed to have in my mind, that we were being fair, as Mr. Abkarian said, to all the employees in that group. And I'm certainly satisfied with that, so I'll entertain.
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Chair Devine?
Yes. That's approved, and good luck to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item.
Item number 2, minutes for the meeting of April 13, 2016.
Move to approve?
Second.
Was everyone?
Did I leave early?
I abstain.
No, I don't think I left
Okay,
early.
there was one abstention to be 4 approvals. Okay. Next item.
Civil Service Commission staff comments.
Any comments from my colleagues?
I want to thank the city, Mayor. I want to thank the city for once again rising on the occasion of the 100th commemoration of the Armenian Genocide last Friday and putting on a very appropriate and fitting program at the Alex Theater in collaboration with the various community organizations here in the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gazarian. Any others?
I have a quick comment. I was wondering if we can maybe put on the agenda sometime in August. This will give end of August, even September, maybe a review of all the civil service rules to see if there's any revision necessary to it. So I would like to see if we can maybe do a review of the rules sometime in September of this year, maybe. Give enough time for any employee association that wants to make comments, anyone else that would want to make comments to it, and then any comments from the members of the commission to see if we need to make any rule changes. So if that could be brought in maybe sometime in September, that would be great.
Certainly. There is a effort and dialogue that I've been having with the city manager and in turn with the city council about looking at kind of a broader aspect of civil service and some items relative to the charter as to whether some things can be adjusted or looked at relating to the provision of the charter that deals with civil service. It's actually Article 24, and the intent was to bring that to the commission. Nothing drastic, but a couple of key areas that could help improve things, efficiencies, and while maintaining, certainly the appropriate employee protections. And so I would intend to bring a report on that in sometime in the next few months. We can.
Why do we hold off on looking at the rules until we know what the changes might be? Let me just understand the process then. The process will be that a recommendation will come to us for our review, and then it will go to the city council for the amendment to the civil to the city charter.
Yes, there's an election occurring April of 2017, and I think there's going to be an effort to identify some areas of the charter, not just civil service, but things that might address finance, purchasing, things like that. And as part of that, we'd like to look at some of the areas relating to civil service. As I said, nothing drastic, but things that sort of on the periphery that might, some common sense changes. Certainly, these are things we would bring to you first for your feedback. If there are things that would, we'd want to push forward, we'd also have to meet and confer with our employees. But certainly, the things that are being discussed are, I think, all relatively good ideas, one of which might relate to this whole issue we dealt with today, having to do with, really title changes and reclassifications. Maybe there's a better way to do that, but in order to do that, we'd have to look at not just the rules, but the charter itself. So
it would be I would just tell you that it would be a sad day in the city if the Civil Service Commission's role, especially when it comes to hearing, is diluted. It would be the worst thing that could ever happen to every city employee in the city of Glendale. I'll just mention that because our job is to protect the city employees, regardless of what happens. At the end of the day, there has to be a fair body that looks at everything. If that process is diluted or changed, I think it would be a disaster for every employee in the city of Glendale. And if you're an employee in the city of Glendale, and if that process is diluted, you really need to take some arm. This is something that could really drastically change what happens to every city employee in this city. That's all I got to say.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Karian, I can assure you nothing along those lines is being addressed. The the areas that I've had dialogue with the city manager relate to
I think
other
we've
matters.
we've gone too far, and the attorney is telling us we were talking too much about it. So maybe when you bring it up, we'll talk some
Yeah,
more.
I think we've heard your request to have a review of the rules. We'll try to combine that with the process that's currently underway and bring it back at an appropriate time.
Any others? Next item.
Adjournment.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.